Okay, so just while we're loading that presentation up, I'm intrigued. I'm changing into a different industry here that obviously I've not presented to before. Who's heard of NAV Canada? Well, that's a good sign. Okay. Who is already a drone pilot? Okay, excellent. Who's an advanced drone pilot? Okay, very good. All right. So we'll get going. My intent here will be to really. You found it? Go. That's it. Yeah, perfect. Presentation. There you go. Excellent. Thank you, sir. So we are changing gear, away from the application into the conversation about the airspace and what actually happens. And for those of you who may not be familiar with NAV Canada, I'll tell you a little bit just very quickly about who we are. We're responsible for the airspace in Canada. So when you get on an aircraft, there are services that we provide that aircraft, that operator, to be able to get you safely from A to B. The primary service that we provide is air traffic control. That's what most people know us for. And if you watch in the movies, you'll see the air traffic control centers, you'll see people controlling aircraft. That's fundamentally, what people associate NAV Canada with. There's a lot of other services that go on into that airspace as well, including flight information, flight planning, weather briefings, and other activity. And there's a lot of infrastructure that we lay down to be able to do this. You'll see, again, if you're at the airport, you look around, you'll see the control tower. You'll see other buildings. You'll see some of our infrastructure, usually painted quite vibrantly. And you'll see things like this. You'll see radars. So when that aircraft is particularly in a control zone, in an area that's controlled by NAV Canada, we will see those aircraft through things like radar, which is on the left. We also see it now through a technology called ADS-B, and it's space-based. So we actually see what's happening across the whole of Canada at a higher altitude for aircraft that are equipped with certain equipment, an ADS-B transponder. So that's where NAV Canada's kind of history is, and its most recent innovation around space-based ADS-B. But then you move into the drone space. And particularly when we talk about small RPAS, we talk about RPAS which are heavier than 250 grams. If you're below 250 grams, you're a micro drone. There are only a small number of regulations that apply to micro drones. But here we're really in that space of 250 grams to 25 kilograms. So typically the space you'll be operating in. And the problem for me as the person who's responsible for the airspace is I can't see these drones. There is no way my radars will pick them up. They're too small. And again, you probably know more about radars than I do. But our radars don't pick them up. There is no ID process at the moment. So I don't know who it is. Every aircraft in Canada, every non-drone aircraft has a call sign. Drones don't. So it's difficult for us to identify them. And they have no radios on board. So all our ATC communications are done via radio. So we have a number of challenges when we start to introduce these into the airspace. So in 2019, Canada brought in regulations, which was a pretty good set of regulations to allow drone operations to occur on a day-to-day basis. Prior to that, and today, if you step outside the regulations, you have to get something called a special flight operating certificate. So if your drone and your payload that you're operating is beyond that 25 kilograms, you've got to get what Ron described as a waiver in FAA parlance. We call it special flight operating certificate. That comes from Transport Canada, and we work with you if you're in controlled airspace as well. But these regulations kind of got away from that. They allowed us to fly frequently, and the regulations focused on three things. They focused on the pilot. So when I asked who is an advanced pilot, those advanced pilots, for example, have been through a higher degree of training and awareness and actually a flight review around their accreditation. So there's aspects of the pilot, there's aspects of the product. So drones have to be on a certain list to fly in controlled airspace. And there's procedures, and that's obviously a lot of where the work from NAV Canada comes in as well. So the regulations really brought all of that together and allowed us to regulate this space. And one of the things that you have to do is if you're flying in controlled airspace, and that is pretty much if you're in a city, probably 2/3 of it, quite frankly, are covered by controlled airspace when you look at the maps. If you're in controlled airspace, you have to ask for permission. That is called an advanced operation, and we have an application to support you with that. Well, that's what the regulations brought in. So when NAV Canada looks at this and how we integrate RPAS into the airspace, there's 5 elements to our strategy. I'm going to talk about 2 of those. One is service provision, and that's the app that we've provided right now. And the second is safety. I'll talk about safety, but there's other considerations that go into this, including our work with the regulator. In effect, the FAA is actually split into 2 things: the provision of service and the regulatory side. So Transport Canada does the regulatory side in Canada. We provide all the service effectively. So how we work with Transport Canada is one of those aspects that we look at through our operations team and through our stakeholders. And there's a lot of innovation. I'll talk about innovation at the end as we get to the more exciting topics of BB loss and where we go from here. But I will just start here, just because I have to present this information and continue to make people aware of this. If we see drones around airports and in controlled airspace that do not have authorization, particularly close to runways, they're considered incursions, and we have a whole process of dealing with that. Many years ago, there was a very famous case around Gatwick in the UK, which closed Gatwick for a period of time and cost UK industry a lot of money and Gatwick Airport a lot of money. And there's a safety risk, obviously, if drones are not where they're supposed to be. So, part of me speaking at events like this is just to say, look at the regulations, understand the regulations, get the certification, because we want to avoid cases like this, especially when they're commercial cases. And our experience is most commercial operators follow the rules, do the right things. It's typically not the commercial operators who end up in these kind of situations. Anyway, so we do a lot of work around safety and making sure that we keep the airspace safe. Final point on this: if you fly certain types of drones, and the #1 flying drone in Canada, you should also be aware that the airports, if they buy the equivalent technology from that provider, can see all your drone flights. So if you're in around Vancouver airport, for example, then they can actually track you, see where your ground station is, see where your drone is. So you may think people aren't aware of where that flight is. They probably are with some of the technology that's out there right now. So let's talk about service and the service that we do provide to help out in this space. We've got a service called NAV Drone. NAV Drone is focused on really taking those procedures and making information available for you to be able to plan your operations, get the permission that you need if you're an advanced pilot to be able to fly in controlled airspace. So it really helps kind of bring all of that together. Why do we do it? Part of it is education. Part of it is raising awareness in the industry and in different industries like this for what you need to do as a pilot to stay safe. It gives you a flight planning ability and lets us know where you're thinking of flying. We're also, keen to raise awareness generally in the industry about, about these aspects and what's going on, and also give our units information. And I'll talk about emergency management in a moment. It allows us to manage our workload. So, we have, if you imagine, everyone who wants to fly a drone in controlled airspace, prior to us bringing this service in, had to contact the units directly. And so there's a PDF form, and every one of those used to go into a unit. And we really don't want air traffic controllers being distracted by all of these. There's an element that they still need to pay attention to, but most of these we can automate, and we do. So how are we doing? So we've got regulations, we've got airspace information, we've got automation built into this application, and we have users on our side as well as the pilot side as well. So I'm hoping that when I ask this question, the same advanced pilots will put their hands up. Who's used NAV Drone? Anybody use NAV Drone? It's about the same. That's good. It's good to see. Thank you. So NAV Drone, there's an app. You can go and download it for free. It's on the iOS platform. It's on the Android platform. There's a website. If you don't want to sign up, there's a place called map.navdrone.ca. You can just go on and investigate and look at airspace and understand what's happening around where you are. So there are tools that you can use kind of without even registering. If you are an advanced pilot, if you want to fly in controlled airspace, you have to register and you have to use the tools and you have to do flight planning through this tool. So what does it give you as an operator? It gives you airspace information. So it will tell you the kind of airspace that you're in, so you understand what permission you might need. It will help you with flight planning. So whether it's, you know, a circle or whether it's a path that you want to chart, it does those various flight planning options for you. And what it will then tell you when you verify that flight is it will tell you whether you need permission to fly that operation or you're good to go. So that's what it gives the operator. And again, the automation of this means that if you're in controlled airspace, but you're flying below certain altitudes, you can get a response immediately. So we don't want to kind of hold up your operations as well. It's good to plan in advance though, especially if you may need that manual approval. Give it a few days to make sure that that plan's in the system. What does it give Nav? It, again, allows us to automate that workload, gives us some operational insight into what you're doing, and allows us to handle emergency management. So if you're in controlled airspace and something else happens, if a medevac flight goes through or there's some other incident occurring, we can have direct contact with you from the unit to ask you to, you know, get out of the way, land your drone or whatever is required, again, to keep the airspace safe. And there's also options for you to contact the unit as well directly if you ever have trouble or a flyaway or anything like that occurs as you're flying. So we handle emergency management as well. So we launched Nav Drone in June 21. You can see where the orange bars kick in. Those orange bars are the places where we'll be able to automate. So what that means is at that point, pilots and operators have been able to get an immediate response, be able to fly in that location. If you're in the US, there's a similar system called Lance. It does a similar kind of job to this as well, and there's different providers that provide that service, but effectively it's the same thing. So we model a lot on what the FAA does. We've now got over 17,000 users with 3,500 advanced certified pilots, and we're seeing the growth of operations at about 60% a year. So that's pretty significant. We didn't estimate it was going to be that big. When I asked Ron the question earlier around, you know, BV loss and how big do you think that will be for you? How many more operations do you think you'll fly? The reason I keep asking those questions when I'm in these forums is, how do we ensure we're supporting the capability that industry needs as we move forward? And I totally understand the response. The response is, you know, this is going to open up capability. We don't know where we're going to go with that capability yet, right? That's there's going to be some exciting things happen through that process. Just final point on this chart, these little green dots are actually places where missions are also planned in Class G. So you don't have to be in controlled airspace to use it. You can use it anywhere. And again, it makes sure that you understand the airspace and what's going on there. So research and trials. Well, why are research and trials important? Well, they're important because we want to get to the next stages of growth in RPAS. We want to enable beyond visual line of sight. Beyond visual line of sight isn't just always about going a long way out. It can sometimes be, if you're flying just above tree height, you know, you'll lose visibility of that drone pretty quickly. If you go around a building, you'll lose visibility of that drone pretty quickly. So how do we build capabilities to enable you to do those kind of flights as we move forward? So we're working, you know, we work with the FAA, we work with other international bodies and some of the governing bodies and standards bodies to kind of work through all the technical aspects of these flights. We have a forum in Canada that's combined of industry, and some of the drone operators and drone service providers are on that forum. They help guide what's required here, and we work with Transport Canada and ourselves on that forum. I happen to co-chair that forum, and we are undertaking trials. So we have trials underway right now of people flying beyond visual line of sight, so that we understand what capabilities do we need to make this happen. What are the things that we need to do to enable this important step? So additionally, what we're also looking at is Nav Drone's got a full roadmap for the next couple of years. So, you know, outside of beyond visual line of sight and what we'll do there's additional capabilities we want to bring in, and bringing that to other stakeholders like airport authorities is also important. I haven't talked about it much, but we also, of course, are looking at the beyond 25 kilograms side of things. So the large RPAS, these are typically IFR equipped. These are typically flying as if they are traditional aircraft, except they don't have a pilot on board, which again, gives us quite a few challenges to work through from a regulation perspective. And finally, drone detection technologies. I mentioned some of these are already deployed, particularly DJI ones out there that give a lot of insight into those flights. But there are lots of other drone detection technologies based on optical, audio, RF, you name it, that's being deployed at airports to make sure we understand where drones are when they shouldn't be there, when they're not being cooperative. So that's all from me, just to give you a quick taster of what the airspace looks like in Canada and some of the considerations. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Very interesting. It's a talk that I wanted to see like 3 or 4 years ago when I first got into this business. What are all these regulations? Now I know. Well, actually, the first thing I did, the smartest thing I did was to hire a drone pilot, and I suggest that anybody who wants to get into this, they do the same thing.
Hello. With a lot of my colleagues, there's a lot of excitement about BV loss, and with our regular flights and things that we do right now, we're kind of very focused on just regular VLOS flights. We've also, I kind of consider it as like almost like a walk to run approach. I've had conversations with other professionals who've discussed things like assisted VLOS stuff.
Yeah.
Is there anything you can comment about that in terms of like the walk, crawl, or crawl, walk, run approach of that?
Yeah, great question. So today under VLOS, I'm sure that people who are advanced pilots know this, but under VLOS, you can put multiple observers out there, and as long as they're connected to you via some communication medium, you can that is still VLOS. So effectively, the cases I was talking about where you're going around a building, you can deploy visual observers and you can overcome some of those immediate challenges. The next stage of regulations in Canada will be for something called low risk BV loss, and that's flights which occur. So if you're out in the middle of nowhere, you've got very low airspace activity, very low traffic in the air, and there's very few people on the ground below where you are. That's something called low risk BV loss. That's the next set of regulations that will come out, again, as part of this crawl, walk, run. That's exactly the right way to think about how we're extending into this. That set of regulations we're hoping to be released in an initial consultation document by Transport Canada later this year. Where are we now? Actually, it's going to be next fall that will come out. Again, aviation is not a fast process to change regulations. So that will come out next fall. There'll be a consultation period, and then that will go into place. So that will give you the ability to fly BV loss with the right kind of equipage and technologies on your drone in those low risk airspaces. And then a lot of the research we're doing now is, okay, how do we go beyond that? How do we bring drones into controlled airspace in overpopulation, in other areas that could be higher risk? Good question. Thank you.
Other questions?
Thank you. I just have a bit of a practical question from your perspective. When we're flying in the middle of nowhere, right, and we might have uploaded it with Nav Canada or with the Nav drone app, but then we're hours at a cell service. And so if we wanted, the positive is obviously we're not near anything when we're flying, but at the same time, we can't update anything we're doing. If we end up moving to a different area, we find different targets. From your perspective, how much of an issue is that in terms of that we can't provide any sort of flight plan or update or anything because we're simply out of cell range or any sort of communication range?
Do you find you're actually in controlled airspace?
No, not at all. I'm just thinking, I know there's generally a preference to have that uploaded anyways. Obviously, we're out of controlled airspace at that point.
Yeah, it is. So when we talk about BV loss and we talk about even kind of where we are today, Canada's a huge geography, right? Relatively speaking, we often talk with people in Europe. I talked with one guy in Luxembourg, and have a joke about the difference in geographic size and the challenges we have. In some of those countries, they have LTE coverage everywhere. We don't, clearly. So it's an ongoing issue for us. Quite honestly, if you are outside the cell coverage, there's nothing you can do. If you've done best efforts to, look at the airspace, make sure it's not controlled airspace, you don't need planning and stuff. There's not a lot more you can do practically right now. We are looking at nav drone from that kind of can you use it offline perspective as a future capability. We're not there yet, but we are looking at that, and like, how could we do that for people? So good question again. Thank you.
Yeah, I have the same question. We're operating out in the middle of nowhere. That's what Canada is all about, especially mineral exploration. And what I'm hearing from you is just do your best effort.
Yeah, I mean, when you're outside, when you're in Class G, right? That's uncontrolled airspace, which is typically when you're in the middle of nowhere where you are. You're in Class G airspace. You need to follow the regulations. You need to do site surveys and things, but you don't have to be connected to this app. You don't have to put your flight plans into this app if you're in Class G airspace. So, do your site surveys, do all the things that you should do from a regulation perspective, but you don't have to be connected at that point.
One of the things we're doing, and quite a few other people are in this, is when you're in the middle of northern Saskatchewan bush, you get yourself a cherry picker, a lift, and get up above the tree level, and that extends your line of sight a little bit.
Yeah.
And it basically it's just best effort, I think, is the bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. In those places, again, you can be within the regulations through those best efforts. There's nothing that requires you to be connected at that point. This is part of the technology and the challenges of the future, because when we move into looking at what we call RPAS traffic management, RTM, how do we deal with that lack of connectivity? When these flights are not being seen by the operator, when they're going beyond line of sight, how do we manage that if they're not connected? It's a big challenge for us to crack as we move forward.
Got another question?
Thanks for your talk. That was pretty informative. I have a question from a manned aviation side, so I'm a pilot as well. And from that perspective, there's also apps that we use, such as Top of Flight or ForeFlight. And usually when you take off from an airport, you might get a NOTAM if there's a drone operation within that controlled airspace. But typically there's no other information about where drone operators are. Is there some future effort to work with something like ForeFlight to show manned aviation pilots where the drone operations could be?
It's a very good question, and I'll just one piece of information about what you said at the start of that. Actually, drone operations don't have to file NOTAMs. It's very unusual, in fact, that we would file a NOTAM for a drone operation. We would only do that if it was a very high-risk operation that would put certain procedures in place to deal with. So say you were actually on an airport or something like that, would file a NOTAM. Typically, NOTAMs aren't filed. So that makes your point even more valid, your question even more valid, which is, how does a pilot know about it? And the way the system is established is that drone operator, it's their responsibility. And it's important that people don't understand this. The drone operator has to stay out of the way of traditional aviation. Traditional aviation, therefore, should not need today to have visibility. However, we do get that question a lot, and it is something that we're looking at from the various technologies that are available today. Is there a way to, for example, rebroadcast what's going on through some of those technologies? What we don't have today is surveillance on the drone. So at best, what we could give you today is there may be a drone in this kind of area, which isn't very helpful in a lot of cases. When we get to something called remote identification, which is the technology that allows us to see where the drones are, then that becomes something which in the future we can then think about, how do we use this? How can we rebroadcast it to traditional aviation to help them understand if there are other things that may be considerations for their flight planning or for their actual flight?
Any other questions? Look, we've got one down here.
Keeping you fit, running around the building today.
Excuse me, Brown.
This is a pretty specific question around a use case that comes up quite a bit in my industry. The 400-foot limitation makes sense in a lot of cases, except for drones are not like regular aircraft, of course. And when you're dealing with areas like, say, I'll use this specific example because it's one that we struggle with, is you've got, say you want to do geotechnical surveys against a mine pit wall. You're obviously going to need to go above 400 feet. And we constantly debating, well, you're not in airspace that's used by anybody else. You're against the wall, that kind of thing. Like, is there, that sounds very specific, of course, but it's the kind of things that we struggle with regulation. Is there something that NAVCAN's looking at along those lines?
So in the regulations today, there is a piece, and I can't remember it in detail, but there is a piece about being against structures or close to structures. So again, if you're outside of controlled airspace, if you are close to a structure, you can actually go above 400 feet, but you've got to stay within certain proximity to that structure. So I'd point you, I can't remember the exact details of that, but I'd kind of point you back to that to check, because there may be something in there today that would ease that consideration. But it is one of the areas where we continue to look at is, are there places where kind of shielded operations could occur for drones where, you know, for example, along a railway, take a different example, along a railway, you know, we know that around that doing BV loss flight, for example, would be more straightforward. There's a lot of railway inspection required. Is there something we can do to keep traditional aviation out of those areas? So we are looking at, you know, thinking about those concepts and how we would build those into airspace structures. But there may be something that already covers that specific kind of altitude structural question in the regs right now.
And power line inspections as well.
Exactly.
Fits into that category.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, these are traditionally today very high risk operations done by helicopter. You know, much simpler, much cheaper, much lower risk to do these by drones, and so they need the enabling capabilities to be able to do that.
Right. Okay, I got a really weird off-base question here. There's a thing that kind of got me into this, interested in it. A few years ago, Amazon started talking about delivering things to your doorstep with a drone. Is this all BS? Is it complete nonsense, or are you planning for it?
All the things that we're doing, when we talk about BV loss, all of those capabilities will ultimately enable that kind of thing. That package delivery will become, you know, something in the future. It's been a lot harder for industry to actually get the technologies and capabilities that they would need to be able to do that in place and to get them regulated, whether, you know, by the FAA or by us. You know, we've got a very safe airspace in Canada today, in the US as well. We all know that air travel is an incredibly safe form of travel, and so there's a lot of regulation, a lot of care and high degree of efficacy around this industry, and so these things take time. So, you know, somebody like Amazon is frustrated that, you know, they haven't been able to get there faster, but they will. You know, this will come. You know, when we look at BV loss and all the different use cases, it's deliveries, it's inspections, it's all sorts of commercial stuff, but also the bigger societal benefits. You know, we talk a lot to first responders, we talk a lot to police forces and different organizations who make active use of drones for the good of society, and also for the good of keeping their officers safe at times as well. So and all of these groups, all of these industries need this extra level of capability. So everybody wants it. We just have to get there, crawl, walk, run, as gentleman at the front said. So yeah, it's that kind of approach.
One of those that I heard about recently was delivering organs from an airport to a hospital using a drone.
Yeah, we actually had in Canada, it was in controlled airspace in Toronto. We had a lung delivery between two hospitals. So that flight was planned on NAV drone, and they had people on the roofs of those buildings to watch the drone fly over. And this drone flew in minutes, something that would have taken a lot longer, you know, going to the ground and taking it across Toronto. So, and extending that beyond, you know, beyond that short visual line of sight to bigger capabilities. We've seen, there's a trial done where an AED defibrillator was delivered by a drone And this trial, it got there like 20 minutes faster than an ambulance would have got there. So there's real benefits apart from your pizza delivery and your package delivery and things. There are some real good societal benefits.
It's going to be a strange new world if I start seeing drones dropping off packages at my doorstep. I'll tell you that.